Hi neighbors, it's Ashley here. I'm so glad you've decided to carve out a little bit of your time to be here with us today. You know, we live in a world that is louder than it has ever been. We carry 1,000 voices in our pockets, pinging us with news, social updates, and urgent emails. We've become experts at being connected. If you're anything like me, being quote-unquote connected doesn't make you more present. In this episode, Judith and I chat about solitude and being present with ourselves. Now, before you think, oh, Ashley, I'm lonely enough as it is, let's clear up one thing. Solitude isn't loneliness. As scholars Long and Averill pointed out in their 2003 exploration of being alone, loneliness is a negative state marked by isolation, a kind of gnawing lack. Solitude, however, is a constructive, intentional engagement with oneself. It's the quiet space between the notes of a song. Very poetic. Intentional solitude can be a part of positive self-stewardship. It's the idea that your inner world is a resource that needs tending and care, just like a garden. Taking time for yourself isn't about hiding or keeping secrets. It's about being a good steward of your own mind. Don't forget to grab the free conversation guide that goes with this episode. Use the conversation guide to initiate and experience more and deeper conversations in your own life. See our show notes for links and more information. And stay tuned after the conversation to hear the Try It Today challenge and get in on the fun. So grab a cup of coffee with us, find a comfortable spot, and let's step into the conversation. You know, for many people, the idea of being alone, of truly experiencing solitude can kind of feel like a hurdle. And it's often talked about as a struggle to overcome or a skill that needs to be built. Now, transparently, Judith, you know, I was the kid who actually loved my own company. While others were kind of looking for crowds or playmates, I was actually very content in my own world with my drawings and my storylines. And while, you know, how I spend my moments of solitude now may be different, that time with myself is one of the most highly valued parts of my life today. And I imagine it always will be. That's kind of who I am. However, I'm also aware that there's a thin, sometimes blurry line here. While I generally find deep contentment in my moments of solitude, I've certainly felt before the sting of loneliness too. And it's a very distinct difference. At least I think it is. You know, being in solitude where you're just physically alone is so different from experiencing solitude as a restorative state. You know, one might feel empty while the other feels entirely full. Now, as an adult and especially as a parent, my perspective has shifted to greater appreciation and understanding of experiencing restorative solitude. So I'm curious, Judith, over the years, do you feel like your relationship or experience with solitude has changed? And is it something that you practice regularly? And if so, how do you do it?
That's an interesting question. And the reason why it's interesting is that you have to be alone means that you don't choose to have anything that you're engaged with. At least that's what it is to me. So choosing to not be concerned about anything else going on in the world allows the opportunity to experience the refreshment of solitude. So letting go. And has it changed over the years? Absolutely. Without a doubt. The opportunities for solitude are much greater now than they were when I was in a younger state. I had children, I had work, I had demands that were different. Not more, not less, just different at that time. Being able to allow myself the time to truly reflect required a structure then that now I do almost daily. And I do that at different times. So if I can get 10 minutes, I do 10 minutes. If I can only do 3 minutes, I'll do 3 minutes. It's just whether I need to go out and pick up the deer pellets in the backyard by myself.
She's got some deer running through the backyard pretty regularly.
And I can appreciate that because it gives me that moment whenever I'm out, just aware of what there is that's beautiful about that time alone. The alone time to think or just to reflect on what was.
When you were younger, you had a job, a family, a whole family life, really. You were saying that you still needed that time but you had to really be intentional about carving out that time. Is that kind of what you were explaining earlier?
Intentional within the limits of other people's needs. And the reason why I say it that way is that that my priority was my family. And so what I did was focused on my family. Yet my work oftentimes took me away. And as a result, I would find myself up extremely early in the morning, and I would find opportunities on an airplane, in the airport, on the ride into the airport, to provide myself the opportunity for true solitude. And true solitude for me is where I allow a higher being to manage that time. And I hopefully have the capability of listening to try to understand what next needs to happen in my life or how to resolve something I'm working with within my life or what I need to be doing to benefit others. That's, for me, what solitude allows.
So I'm curious, listening to, how you describe your experience of solitude, what kind of arose for me there was, we hear tons about meditation, the benefits of meditation these days. Meditation has been around for centuries, but we hear a lot about it, when we think about mental health and wellness and just overall experiencing of life, why meditation can be an important practice. But as you were describing solitude, I started thinking about are you meditating? Is that what that means to you? When I think about solitude, I'm not meditating might be like solitude is a bucket of experiences, and meditation is one method of experiencing solitude. I'm thinking about it, in real time here. So I'm curious, how do you think about, is meditation do you think that's the same as solitude, or is it how do you think about that? Are you meditating when you experience solitude?
Meditation to me is very active. And whenever I think of solitude in its purest form for me, it's extremely inactive. It's truly not forcing myself to do anything except receive whatever comes my way. So from that standpoint, I would say meditation, I see great benefits in meditation. I think it can provide focus, and I think it can provide a relief or a pleasant outcome, but I see it as very active.
Often these days it is explained as an activity, but I don't know that's how it's meant. I don't really think it is, based on the learnings that, and how I've studied meditation. Not that I am by no means an expert, but I don't think it's meant to necessarily be an active practice. I think it's meant to be, you're there and you're focused on being and experiencing the passing by of life as a witness. So I wonder if there are actually more similarities, in traditional kind of meditation and in solitude, how you're thinking about it, versus I think where you and I might often see, on a meditation app, there's a very specific practice, or there's a very, a guided meditation, which does tend to keep you actually pretty active, to your point, because you're listening for the next set of instructions and when to breathe. But I don't know that that's how meditation is truly meant to be or to be experienced.
I think back even whenever I was a child and I would sit out and under the weeping willow tree. I would sit there and just hear everything going around. Sometimes I'd close my eyes, sometimes I'd leave them open, but I would receive. And whenever I think of solitude, even now as an adult, it's putting myself in the position of reception, which is a very unique model in my mind, because so often we have lots coming into us. Constant flourish of information and things happening. But do we really get what's there that that's all overshadowing. Instead, if you open up your whole mind and your soul to what is available that we can't hear, we can't see.
There was an earlier conversation we had, Judith, on the front porch mindset.
Mm-hmm.
I can't remember the quote exactly. We'll have to go back and look at that quote again. Is almost like, letting the day explain itself. That was my quote that I remember from that, that conversation we had. And it seems like we might be saying very similar or the same things, like letting the day just be and letting your mind have the time to process it without deeply analyzing it.
Mm-hmm.
So often, and we replay scenarios in our minds over and over, and it can become addictive, to do that. And I think like when you are explaining your experience of solitude here, you're waiting for the insight to occur, but you're not necessarily replaying scenarios over and over. You're just waiting for, the insight, and you trust. If I'm interpreting, you tell me if I've got this wrong, but it seems like, you trust by sitting there or just being, you're trusting that the insight will come.
Yeah, that's very accurate of understanding that you have that opportunity to be a vessel, and things come into you rather than forcing it through an exercise. You are in a receptive mode. I think that's the biggest thing, is to be receptive. And so often we try to force fit things. Mm-hmm. And in solitude, if you move into a method of really taking solitude as the vehicle, then you allow things to come in that you wouldn't allow otherwise. You would overlook them. So it is a trusting method. You must trust. And it's not one that you say, well, if I don't get 3 new ideas, then something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But instead, keep providing yourself the opportunity to receive, and then instead of deflecting.
Yeah, that's so insightful. I really like that. And as you were describing that, what came up for me is it's almost like, I love the word vessel, and it's like electricity, like, and really, I think we are electrical beings. Again, I'm not going to get too scientific here because I'm not an expert in this, but, it kind of like what you're describing to me is like, you have to, your wires all have to be open in order to receive, so the light switch has to be turned into the on position, and if you're over analyzing and thinking, constantly replaying things in your mind, that's really like your light switch is in the off position. It's, the circuit is too full to receive any more. So that's a super, thanks for sharing that experience and like how you experience solitude.
How have you been doing it with solitude? Because I know you do enjoy your solitude.
Yeah, I really do. And, I've been trying to learn new meditation methods. That I'm pretty obsessed with learning new things. I just love to expand my understanding of our world. And with meditation, I think my experience has been like, I'm certainly not ever going to give up on it, but my experience has been, it's not all for me. Like some of the techniques might be helpful for some people, but most of the time, I don't really love like all the guided meditations, and I've tried many, so listeners, if you have any specifics that you really love, hey, send them over. I haven't found any that really, accomplish what we've talked about. Right. What usually works best for me is silence. And because I love to learn, I often sacrifice silence for learning, which isn't always the best choice. But like, we were talking about, in another conversation, we talked about like, being out in the neighborhood, and often we are, we might have our earbuds in, and I'm always trying to maximize my use of my time. But sometimes the best thing for my brain is to not listen to anything. And then I see so much more. There's so much learning opportunity in our world today. There's so much access, we can access books, we can access so much digitally that sometimes we forget that our brains need time without constant stimulation and without constant input. So this might be your cue, listener, to stop the audio and go take a walk without anything in your ears, or just sit by a window. And I think we're going to talk about our Try It Today challenge here in just a little bit. And Judith and I are going to join you on this Try It Today, and we're excited to see if this resonates with you. Judith, as we kind of wrap up this conversation, any thoughts that you want to pass on to our listeners?
Enjoy the moment and be open to whatever comes in.
So in each of our podcast episodes, Judith and I each choose a quote to share, and we tell you why it resonated with us today. Judith, what's your quote for today?
Mine today is by Nikki Rowe, and it's "Solitude is where I place my chaos to rest and awaken my inner peace." And boy, does that ever resonate with me, because chaos tends to be all around me. And so the idea of moving that chaos to a place, because it'll come back, and using that time to get my inner peace and become a really much healthier person as a result.
That's a beautiful quote. Do you want to read it for us one more time?
One more time. Is "Solitude is where I place my chaos to rest and awaken my inner peace."
Beautiful. My quote today is attributed to Paul Tillich, and it's, "Language has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and it has created the word solitude to express the glory of being alone." And I really like that. We've talked about, what it, how we experience solitude. And I think that when we're alone, physically alone or mentally alone, we can choose our experience. We can choose to experience loneliness and wish it was different than it was, or we can choose to experience solitude and gain from it and allow our souls to rest in the moment. And this quote really resonated for me. So I'll read it one more time. My quote was, "Language has created the word loneliness to express the pain of being alone, and it has created the word solitude to express the glory of being alone." And again, that was attributed to Paul Tillich.
So again, solitude is for refreshment of the soul.
Yeah, restorative.
Yep.
Restorative practice. It's time for this episode's Try It Today challenge. These small, low-stakes experiments are designed for anyone, anywhere to jump in and join us in an exploration. We'll be doing them right along with you, and we'll share out on Instagram and Facebook at Front Porch Retreats. This episode's Try It Today challenge is a solitude snack. At some point today, find a window. Maybe you're at home or maybe you're at the office. I want you to sit by that window for just 5 minutes and breathe. You can spend more time with this challenge if you want. If you need to keep track of time, you can set a timer on your phone and place it face down on a table across the room or just outside the door. If possible, pick a time where you are highly unlikely to be interrupted. But if that just doesn't work for you, embrace the activity around yourself and try to remain still and turn inward. During these 5 minutes, just look at the world moving outside while you stay still inside. It's only 5 minutes, so definitely don't work through your to-do list. I promise your to-do list will still be there for you to think about after. Like Judith mentioned in our earlier conversation, think about it as providing yourself the opportunity for true refreshment. We want to know what happened in those 5 minutes. Did you feel that itchy sense of anxiety at first? Did your brain finally stop spinning for a moment? Or maybe because you were finally still, you noticed a bird or a detail in the landscape you've never seen before. Take a photo of your view or your solitude spot. Post it on Instagram or Facebook and tag us at Front Porch Retreats. Whether it was a glory or a struggle, we want to hear about your experience in the quiet. We're right here with you, neighbor. I want to leave you with a thought from the Nobel Prize-winning author Pearl S. Buck. She once wrote, "Inside myself is a place where I live all alone, and that's where I renew my springs that never dry up." I love that image of a spring. It suggests that solitude isn't a chore or a lonely desert. It's actually where our energy, our joy, and our ideas are refilled. When we take that time to be alone and present with ourselves, we aren't just resting. We are practicing the self-stewardship we talked about earlier, making sure our well is deep enough to keep giving to those we love. If this episode resonated with you, please subscribe to the Front Porch Retreats channel on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. You can find the full conversation guide for this episode on our website, frontporchretreats.com. Use the conversation guide to initiate and experience more and deeper conversations in your own life. See our show notes for links and more information. See you soon. Bye, neighbors.